Before we begin, please don't forget to subscribe. Number 1. I was with my boyfriend on vacation in Ithaca at the time. Just 10 minutes after entering the town, we came to a stop at a suspension bridge close to Cornell's campus. My partner was encouraging me to cross the bridge step by step because I'm afraid of heights. We paused in the midst to take a photo since it was so beautiful. In contrast to the parking lot and steps that were on the side from which we had entered the gorge, there were hiking trails without any obstructions on the opposite side. As she passed us, a woman asked to snap our photo. She grinned and immediately crossed the bridge to the opposite side, where she descended into the gorge after we declined. There was no hesitancy at all. In fact, it appeared as though she expected the road to continue. A person making such a jump leaves you with the sound of them striking the ground. I hope the unsettling stories are entertaining you. Remember to leave comments on the stories you would like to hear. Number 2. One of my friend's cousins had this secluded cabin where a group of pals were staying. Since there were no roads leading there, the hike from where you parked the automobiles took about 3/4 of a day. Due to job commitments, I was unable to leave at the same time as everyone else, so I made the decision to leave later on the same day. The final stretch of the trail is too perilous to be traveled at night, especially by someone unfamiliar with it, therefore I would have to spend a night camped alone. I didn't care, in fact, because I had never tented alone before. I was kind of looking forward to it. So as dusk fell, I was in the center of these forests. I put up my camp in this little clearing. Most likely 40 feet across. I'll start my campfire and erect my little one-person tent. Cook hot dogs on a stick over the fire and other camping-related activities. After dark, I probably remain up for around 2 or 3 hours. It was mid-autumn so the days were somewhat short. I always believed I heard something moving in the clearings surrounding woods. At first, I didn't think much of it because there are many of animals in the woods, but as the night wore on, I became aware that whatever it was kept returning to the clearing. When I started paying attention, it made 4 or 5 loops before I took the decision to get up and look. As soon as I leaned forward, the noise ceased, and I thought I heard some sounds fading into the woods. I simply dismissed it, supposing it was a curious fox that became alarmed as I stood up. I decide it's time for bed, extinguish the fire, and enter my tent. I begin to nod off and maintain this state of being half aware and half asleep for a while. When I'm in this state, I frequently hear bizarre noises, so when I hear a voice, I don't pay it any attention. I am fully awakened, though, and I understand the voice is real and is speaking to me from outside my tent. It's barely audible above a whisper, and I'm not sure if they were speaking in another language or merely in English in a way that I couldn't comprehend. I stayed there for an unknown amount of time, listening and waiting for something to occur. I can see when a hand presses into the wall of my tent down by my foot because there is just enough moonlight to illuminate the tent walls. I suddenly sit up because I find this terrifying. Anyone who was outside the tent bolted for the door. Like charging through the woods at full speed. I exit the tent and look about with my flashlight, but there is nothing. The tent was not covered in a bloody handprint, as I had anticipated. I didn't get much sleep that night, so I packed up my camp at first light and headed for the lodge. Number 3. When there was a loud impact on one of the office windows just before the night shift at work ended, I got up and went to investigate. Someone has thrown a very large rock through one of the building's front windows. This is made even stranger by the fact that I'm working in the industrial area at 11:30 at night when no other businesses are open. I return to my desk, make a brief contact to security to inform them, and then make the decision to leave for home. I start stressing out more and more over it as I leave the building and eventually sprint to my car, get in, and drive off. When I realize that I didn't unlock my car when I got in, I'm almost home and have started to cool down a little. All along, it had been unlocked. I quickly examine the back seat with my hand for any potential murderers who could be lurking there, but nothing is there. In 30 minutes, I've contacted a friend who says he is out drinking, and I make the decision to go with him. I mount my bike and head over on it. I'm riding my bike aimlessly down the street, taking in the moonlight and the wonderful night, when I hear someone cycling behind me. I stand up straight and stay to one side of the street. He moves past me very slowly before giving me a smile that I can only describe as completely bonkers. He rides on, and I kind of cringe and feel startled when I realize that he is operating my mother's bicycle. I obviously race the fuck home. When I arrive, I see that her bike has vanished and that a door to my car is open. The left rear one. I had no need to open that door because I was driving. Number 4. When I was younger, I was fiddling with a radio and painstakingly sifting through the static in search of a signal. In order to get a much wider variety of signals, I had located an old television antenna, fixed it to the side of our home, and ran a wire out my window to it with an alligator clip tied to the radio antenna. So I'm sitting there, carefully sweeping frequencies in the early hours, like 2 a.m., when I suddenly find this station playing this incredibly strange crackling sound. It had a similar sound to cracking knuckles or perhaps Rice Krispies cereal, but it had a predictable, repetitive pattern rather than being random. After a few period of listening, it abruptly stopped, and a tremulous voice said, "It is unsuccessful. Already dead are we. Already dead are we." The impact of the words didn't hit me for a second, but when they did, I freaked out and nearly hurled the radio across the room. Even though I'm very sure it was merely someone playing about with a radio transmitter, I was nevertheless frightened to death at the time. Number 5. In 1972, my parents made their first home purchase. Although it needed work, they planned to move in as soon as possible and make repairs as time and money allowed. The new neighbors came over to introduce themselves a short while after moving in. They also informed my parents that the previous occupants had left the property following a contentious divorce. Their relationship deteriorated after they lost their second child to SIDS. The fact that my parents were freshly pregnant and couldn't fathom going through such a thing further added to their horror. In the end, they essentially lost all memory of it. Life continued. Their new home and way of life had them completely smitten. They made the decision to wallpaper the nursery in anticipation of the newborn. My dad had previously advised against wallpapering the interior of the closet, but my mother insisted. When she saw something that caused her blood to freeze, she was knelt down and scraping off old paint inside the closet. "I killed the baby" was scrawled in crayon at around a kindergartner's eye level with a marker. Number 6. Well, I won't soon forget this one. My wife and I formerly resided in a townhouse that was surrounded by trees. We both took a day off work to complete some yard work, including mowing the lawn, weeding our expansive flower beds, putting mulch, and other tasks. It took around 2 full grass clipping bags because our yard wasn't that large. I would carry them a little distance into the woods and pile them there. Something in the center of the woods catches my attention as I return to the first bag's vacant spot. Something strange is moving in the wrong location. To get a closer view, I knelt down, but then I just stood still. I could initially make out a pair of shoes that were simply rocking back and forth, and then I could make out a teenager's body and legs. An adolescent kid who had hanged himself was there in the middle of the woods. I noticed a skateboard resting on the tree next to it. As I started to run back to attempt to save him, I yelled for my wife to contact the police and he was already gone. His head was just slouched over and his body was limp. His unkempt, brown hair was lazily drifting in the wind. The police arrived, immediately took him down, and then left. It turns out that he was experiencing issues with his parents and that's why he made this decision. Number 7. For my parents, I used to work in a trailer park. People would frequently start taking methamphetamine, start to fall behind on their rent, and end up being evicted. When we kicked someone out, their trailer was typically in such bad shape that it was useless. Essentially, we'd buy it from them and just tear it down to avoid having a trailer pile up in the middle of the park. Anyway, here's the weird or terrifying portion. These residents had kids in large numbers. I found locks on the doors from the outside in more than half of the children's rooms. The bathroom areas that occasionally appeared in the kids' quarters made it extremely obvious that the youngsters occasionally would be imprisoned there for days at a time. Usually, the edges of the doors and the door frames of the room's interior doors were scratched. I've always been afraid of starting demolition before getting rid of everything inside. I used to worry that I would stumble upon a dead child among the garbage. The chances of it occurring were, in my judgment, pretty high, yet it never did. Number 8. When I worked in retail, I overheard one of the strangest things ever. I used to work at my store, which offered layaway. There were 3 bathrooms located next to the layaway counter. A family restroom, a women's multi-stall, and a men's multi-stall. The only room with a secured door was the family bathroom, every other room had a push-pull swing door. I was cleaning up in the back when I thought I heard screams, so I went out to the front and stood by the counter. I could hear more yelling. The wailing and shouting continued even after I checked the men's and women's restrooms, which were both vacant when I first heard them. It originated in the family bathroom. I knocked on the door, but the shouting, crying, and yelling persisted. I had no idea what was going on because it sounded like a toddler. I requested a manager since I couldn't enter the building because the entrance was locked. There has been sobbing, yelling, and slamming the entire time. We dialed 911 after making many unsuccessful efforts to enter the door. Although we didn't know what was happening, it didn't sound good. It felt like an eternity, yet I estimate that it was just 15 minutes. The sound check came to an end then. There is no more thumping or sobbing. Up until the police arrived, we pounded on the door. When they did, they had to force the door open since we had lost the key. Blood was everywhere as we all stood around and peered inside. We were initially unsure of what had occurred, but when the police ordered us to back up, they pulled a woman and a child to safety. A 3-year-old bloodied toddler. We basically all stood there in disbelief. Because of all the blood, we assumed the youngster was dead because he wasn't moving. The woman was led away in handcuffs, and the youngster was taken to the hospital. Each of us had to make a statement. My manager informed me of what transpired later. He wouldn't stop crying, and she finally lost it and tried everything in her power to stop him. He was alive. I thought he was dead, but he wasn't, she had only knocked him out with her forceful blows. Although this story isn't particularly spooky in the sense of ghosts, I found it quite frightening because it happened directly behind the door when no one was around to notice or offer assistance. Thanks for listening.